Welcome to this video from the Consultants Development Institute. If you've already seen any of the videos in this series, then I ask your patience as I repeat some information now that you've already heard. For some viewers, this might be their first video. I'm Carter McNamara, an instructor with the Institute and the presenter in this video that is included in the CDI course, Building Trust, Commitment, and Collaboration with Clients. Now let's look at the outcomes that we're aiming for in this video. Perhaps the most important skill needed for building trust, commitment, and collaboration is the skill of listening. We'll share some guidelines for you to practice and improve your listening. But while you're listening to your client should truly be hearing you, not only what you're saying, but what you mean to say. We'll share guidelines for you to clearly convey your meaning and your intent. The concept of authenticity has been getting a lot of attention lately, and for good reason. Authenticity is the bedrock for the success of your working relationship with your client. There are many views on authenticity, some highly practical and others a bit idealized. We'll share some basic guidelines for you and your client to remain authentic with each other. A key role for you as a consultant is to continue to share useful feedback and advice with your client. But your client needs to share useful feedback with you as well. You'll hear some basic guidelines to support high-quality, ongoing feedback in your consulting projects. Diversity means different values, beliefs, perspectives, and opinions. There are numerous reasons why you should recognize and even embrace diversity for the success of your consulting. We'll share the reasons, along with practical guidelines to make diversity a strong tool in your consulting. There might be times during consulting when you and your client disagree with each other. Your client might even be agitated, for example, about strategies to solve a problem or the apparent lack of progress in the project. Conflict itself is not bad. It's how it's handled that can be the problem. We'll talk about some good guidelines here too. If you do your job well in guiding and supporting your clients through change, it's very likely that you will encounter resistance from them. A critical skill for consultants during change is to deal with this resistance. You'll learn how in this video. The success of your consulting project rests as much on the quality of your collaborative relationship with your clients as on any other aspect of your consultancy. And this is true whether you are an external or internal consultant, a generalist or specialist, or work in for-profits, nonprofits, or government. The more collaboratively that you work with your client, the more likely that your client will gain the motivation, the vision, political support, and momentum necessary for successful change. Clients won't change merely because you told them to. The most important requirement for a collaborative consultancy is openness, honesty, and trust between you and your client. To meet that requirement, you need your best interpersonal skills, especially the skills covered in this video. Guidelines in this video will help you to work with your client in an approach that is open and honest and based on clear and supportive communication. However, the video can only convey important general guidelines. You'll need to practice those guidelines in order to build them into useful skills. This course sets a foundation for collaboration with your client. The upcoming CDI course, Collaborative Consulting for Performance Change and Learning, will share many more guidelines, specifically about collaboration, including how to establish it and manage it across different parties in your client's organization. Listening is a critical skill for all adults to have, and it is one of the most important skills for you to use as you learn about your clients, their organization, and their problems. Also, it is one of the most important activities for you to use to establish a strong rapport with your clients. There have been numerous books written about effective listening skills. The following guidelines, though, can help you accomplish effective listening in the vast majority of situations. The first guideline is to be sure that you can even hear the speaker. It is surprising how often people do not really listen to other people. It's just as surprising how often people do not realize that they cannot even hear other people. So always make this your first guideline in any situation for effective listening. Overall, attempt to listen 75% of the time and speak 25% of the time. This is one of the most powerful guidelines. Use of this guideline depends on your situation, of course, but for example, if you are making a presentation, you'll speak more. But otherwise, ensure your client speaks more than you do and listen to them. Adopt a listening posture. And this can be powerful means to show your client that you are indeed interested in even hearing them. For example, you might lean forward and maintain eye contact. Whatever physical gestures you make, be sure they're compatible to the culture of the speaker. And do not think about what you're going to say while you're also trying to listen to the speaker. Your brain goes 4 times faster than a speaker's voice. Thus, your brain can easily leave the speaker behind. Instead, trust that you will know how to respond to the speaker when the speaker is done. Notice the client's speaking style. Different people have different speaking styles. Do they speak loud or soft, slow or fast? Are there disconnects between what they say versus what their body language conveys? Some people convey the central idea first and then support it with additional information. Other people provide information to lead the listener to the same conclusion as the speaker. Listen for central ideas, not for all of the facts. Experienced consultants develop a sense for noticing the most important information conveyed by their client. They hear the main themes and ideas from their client. If you notice the major ideas, then often the facts just kind of come along with those ideas. Let's look at some more guidelines here. Let the speaker finish each major point that they want to make. Do not interrupt. Offer your response when the speaker's done. If you do have to interrupt, do so to ensure that you're hearing your client, and interrupt tactfully. For example, put up your hand and say, "Might I interrupt you to clarify something?" Reflect back what you're hearing and ask if you are hearing their point accurately. This is also one of the most powerful guidelines. Start by asking if you can reflect back or summarize to your client after they've spoken. And regularly share indications that you're listening to them. And those indications can be, for example, nodding your head, saying yes to short points that you agree with. Learn the art of supportive questioning. Coaching involves the use of powerful questions to understand your client's perceptions, assumptions, and conclusions. The coach must practice effective questioning skills to really understand the client. The earlier CDI course, Primary Methods and Myths in Consulting, shared basic guidelines about coaching. And ask others to provide you feedback about your own listening skills. Often, people do not know what they do not know about themselves. An example is the consultant who prizes themselves on their strong listening skills, yet regularly interrupts others when they are speaking. Another example is the consultant who speaks only in conclusions, but does not share how they came to those conclusions. Thus, others do not understand that consultant's rationale. This course has a handout that concisely lists these guidelines, and the handout might be useful to bring along with you when consulting. Usually, your most frequent form of communication to your clients is spoken words. As with nonverbal communication, spoken communication is highly dependent on the particular culture in which you are working. For example, culture can affect how people speak about conflict, use humor, are honest and direct with each other, how they use silence, and even certain wording. But consider the following general guidelines, which might be useful in a wide variety of cultures. First, know the main point that you want to convey. Sometimes people begin speaking with the hope that if they talk long enough, they are bound to say what they want to say. Before you speak, take the time to think about the main points that you want to convey, and convey one point at a time. That approach ensures that your listener is more likely to continue to understand you rather than being overwhelmed with too many ideas delivered at too fast a rate. You might even find that you understand your own thoughts more completely. And vary your voice. Always avoid monotone. A monotone voice might convey to the listener that you're bored or controlled, and it's likely to lull you and your listener into a stupor. Varying your voice takes practice, but it is well worth the effort. Ask the listener to repeat the main points of what you just said to them. This guideline ensures that the listener is indeed hearing what you wanted to convey. Be tactful when asking the listener to repeat back what you said. For example, say, "I want to be sure that I made sense to you just now, so I would appreciate if you could tell me the highlights of what you heard me say just now." And ask others to provide feedback about your spoken communication. One of the most powerful ways to learn about yourself is to ask others for feedback. Therefore, ask others about how you might improve your own speaking skills. And again, this course also has a handout that concisely lists these guidelines, and that might be useful to bring along when you're consulting as well. Peter Block, whom we've referred to several times in CDI courses and programs, asserts that authenticity is the building block upon which all other aspects of the consulting process is built. He suggests that authentic behavior is telling your client how you are experiencing them, especially when you want to draw attention to a particular behavior. Here are several more reasons for the importance of authenticity. Your authentic behavior encourages your clients to be as open, honest, and direct with you. Those aspects form a firm foundation for a highly collaborative working relationship, the kind needed for long-lasting, successful change in organizations. And authenticity produces a free, open, and informed choice for your client to work on success. You remember from the earlier CDI course, Roles, Goals, and Reasons in Consulting, that successful consulting projects require the free, open, and informed choices among your clients and you. In contrast, coercive and limited choices usually produce changes that are short-term and ineffective. The more open and honest that you can be with each other, the more likely your project will be successful. And your authenticity builds your clients' trust and confidence in your relationship. It shows your clients that you trust them enough to be able to handle the truth. In turn, they will do the same thing for you. Their trust and confidence are the other critical ingredients for a successful working relationship between you and your client. And authenticity reveals your client's issues before those issues become even worse. When people express themselves honestly in the here and now, they're much more likely to report issues as soon as they notice them. And this ensures that issues are addressed when they occur, rather than those issues festering until they show themselves as major forms of resistance to change during the project. And authenticity ensures that organizational change efforts remain relevant, realistic, and flexible. Plans rarely are implemented as planned. Authentic behavior from your clients helps all parties involved to accurately perceive and talk about any changes in the project. As a result, plans are updated with those changes and therefore remain up to date. Perhaps Bob Terry puts it best in his book, Authentic Leadership. Authenticity self-corrects. Block and various schools of psychology, for example, Carl Rogers, in his self-directed therapy, describe the following core characteristics of authentic behavior. Considering their descriptions, authentic behavior is more attainable than many people believe, and it might help you to work easier rather than harder in your projects for change. Let's name these guidelines. First, be honest, speak the truth, and be direct. Speak in terms that are clear, concise, and focused, and speak from the here and now. Don't go into a lot of history. Speak from you. That means report your own experience of the here and now. And be non-judgmental of others. Speak about what you are experiencing around others, not of your judgments about them. And note that authentic behavior does not always mean the consultant's very bluntly speaking the truth about anything and everything all the time. Sometimes a consultant senses that the client is not yet ready to hear authentic information, for example, about causes of their issues or their role in it. Sometimes that kind of information would simply overwhelm, confuse, or even hurt them. In every case, it's up to the consultant's judgment as to how much they should share and when. However, usually there's much more of a downside to not being authentic than any downside of authentically sharing your thoughts and concerns with your client. Let's show some examples of authentic responses. If your client, for example, is 20 minutes late for a meeting, what would you do? What would you say? An authentic response would be, I noticed you're late. Are you okay? Let them know that you know and wait for their response. Notice this is open, honest, and direct, and not hurtful. If you notice that your client seems irritable with you, then first verify that impression. Notice what you're seeing or hearing that led you to that conclusion. If you feel the evidence is there, then ask, you seem irritated. What's up? If your client is rambling on in a meeting in which you were to do a training, then you could comment, I appreciate your sharing all of this with me. Should we attend to the training or do you need to talk for a while? Another example is if the client seems distracted. For example, she's not keeping eye contact, is not answering the questions you asked, or her conversation is wandering around. Then you might comment, "You seem distracted. Should we take a 5-minute break?" Notice again, these are open, honest, direct. They're accurate, but they're not hurtful. Feedback is information that is usually about some activities in the past or about some current activities. For example, about your client's past actions and ideas, or about the result of assessments in your client's organization. Advice is usually about how to go forward into the future. Feedback is extremely useful during evaluations of the project and in generating learning from activities. Consider the following guidelines for giving feedback and advice. First, again, be clear what you want to say. You might have already sensed what feedback you want to convey to your client. However, you should think about what points you want to convey and how you want to convey them. Be concise and specific. People often lose specificity when they speak because they say far too much rather than not enough. Or they speak about general themes and patterns. When giving feedback, give details about what you see or hear. Avoid generalizations. Avoid use of the words all, never, and always. Those words can seem extreme, lack credibility, and place arbitrary limits on behavior. Be more precise about quantity or proportion, if you address terms of quantities at all. Be descriptive rather than evaluative. Report what you're seeing, hearing, or feeling. Attempt to avoid words such as good or bad. It may be helpful to quickly share your particular feeling if appropriate, but don't dwell on it or become emotional. And own your feedback. The information should be about your own perception of information, not about theirs. Not about their assumptions and motives. Don't diagnose them. Use I statements as much as possible to indicate your impressions are your own. And be careful about giving advice. When giving feedback, it is often best to do one thing at a time. That is, you share your feedback, get their response to your feedback, and then when they are more ready to consider additional information about going forward, then share your advice with them. Note that if you are sharing a feedback in a meeting with clients about your client's overall organization, for example, the results of an assessment, you should follow a carefully designed agenda for that feedback meeting. One of CDI's programs, Organizational Consulting, goes into much more detail about assessments and about feedback meetings. Now is a good time to pause and reflect on what you've heard so far in your learning journal. Answer the following questions. What is at least one activity or practice that you could do to improve your listening skills? What might that really look like? What resources might you need? And do you need to practice that new practice? How good are you at being authentic? That is, at being honest, open, and respectfully direct about a situation or someone's behaviors. How might you improve? You can pause the video and give this some thought. Perhaps discuss these questions with peers and then write your answers in your journal as well. We'll talk about diversity skills now. Unfortunately, many people still view diversity as working with people of different racial or ethnic or minority groups. That's a rather limiting view of diversity, and it can limit the benefits that come from seeing diversity as being much broader than that. It helps more to interpret diversity as different values, beliefs, perspectives, and opinions. There are many benefits of acknowledging and embracing this diversity during projects for change. For example, organizations and the people within them, they're complex, they're robust systems. They are most accurately understood by integrating multiple, that is diverse, perspectives on them. So it's extremely important for consultants not only to recognize diversity, but to embrace it and work with it for the success of the project. Also, participants in projects for change, they need to feel that they're being understood and respected throughout the project. Those conditions create strong motivation and momentum for change. That's another reason why it's so important for consultants to embrace diversity in their consulting projects. And it's well known that an organization cannot undergo successful long-term change without changing its culture. Its culture is comprised in part of the widely diverse aspects of the members of the organization. That's yet another reason that consultants must recognize and embrace diversity in the workplaces of their clients. As we learned in the previous CDI course about understanding yourself as consultant, differences in strong values and perspectives between you and your client can lead to increased resistance during a project because you and your client do not understand each other. That's yet another reason for you to recognize and appreciate diversity. Here are some basic guidelines for developing your skills in acknowledging and embracing diversity during consulting projects. First, be aware of your personal biases, styles, preferences, how you see organizations. This is critically important for successful consulting in any culture. You make a major difference in your client's organization just by exposing the organization to your own nature and style of working. That previous CDI course on understanding yourself shared many guidelines to discern your style, preferences, and how you see organizations. And realize that each part of an organization probably has its own unique culture. For example, the secretarial staff might interact with each other quite differently than how they interact with executives. In larger organizations, there are often several differences, for example, between senior management and entry-level employees. Promptly convey to your client that you want to be sensitive to their culture. You should start even first in your first meeting with your client. State that you recognize that different people might approach the same project differently, depending on their own personalities and the culture of the organization. And ask your client how you can understand the nature of their organization as well. Consider getting a project mentor or a representative from the organization and attempt to get someone to help you understand the culture and how to work in a manner that is always compatible with the culture of their organization. This request is not a sign of weakness or lack of expertise. Rather, it's an authentic request that better serves you and your client. It's extremely important that the nature of the process be suitable to the culture, as we've talked about. You might get several members from the culture and look at the list that's on this slide. I'll be quiet for just a few moments while you look at the list. If you're looking at this through a smartphone or listening to the audio, I'm going to name some of the items on this list as well. And again, this is a list that you would share with clients and discuss with them to understand their culture. The first item on the list is assertiveness. So are members of the client's organization comfortable being honest and direct with each other? If not, how can you still be authentic as possible and help them to be authentic as possible as well? Another item is communication styles. Is communication fairly direct and specific or more indirect in general? Does information flow mostly upward to executives or the other way around? And conflict. Is conflict considered bad or avoided, or is it accepted as normal and directly addressed when it appears? Eye contact. Are members of the organization comfortable with sustained eye contact during communication? Humor. Humor is very culturally specific. You need to be very careful about using humor during consulting projects. You might be best not to use it at all, unless you first hear occasions of it from your client. Physical space. For example, are members of your client's organization quite conscious of having a minimum amount of space around them when they work or speak with others? And power. Are members attuned to certain people, certain ways of acting, certain ways of solving problems and making decisions? Is power based on authority and/or respect? Silence. For some cultures and for some people, silence is very uncomfortable. For others, silence is a welcome reprieve from frequent and ongoing conversation. And time. Is time a precious commodity that seems to underlie many activities, or can activities take as long as they need to be done effectively? Lastly, what about wording? Are there certain words or phrases that cause discomfort when people from different cultures interact? And again, there's another handout for this video that has these same items on it, and you can share that with your client as a checklist to understand their culture. Interpersonal conflicts can occur, especially when you are addressing resistance from your client. It can occur at other times in the project too. For example, if there's not a match between your style and someone else's in your client's organization. In those situations, you may need your interpersonal skills, particularly in effective listening and speaking. The following basic guidelines will also be useful in addressing the conflict. First, Know what you do not like about yourself. We often do not like in others what we do not like in ourselves. So write down 5 traits that really bug you when you see them in others, and be aware that these traits might be your hot buttons, we'll call them. Manage yourself to stay calm. If you and the other person are getting heated up, manage yourself to stay calm by speaking to the other person as if the other person is not heated up. And this can be very powerful. Give the other person time to vent, at least at first. Do not interrupt them or judge what they are saying. Just letting them vent their uncomfortable feelings can make a huge difference in how they communicate with you. Verify that you are accurately even hearing each other. When they are done speaking, ask the other person to let you rephrase, uninterrupted, what you are hearing from them to ensure you indeed are even hearing them. Repeat the above 3 steps, this time for them to listen to you. When you present your position, use the word I, not the word you. That makes your perceptions yours rather than theirs. And talk in terms of the present as much as possible. So start by acknowledging too where you agree. Seek common ground that way. And if the situation remains a conflict, then consider whether to agree to just disagree. Otherwise, consider seeking a third party to even mediate. But note that the above guidelines are rather basic, but still applicable in many situations. Interpersonal conflicts can be complex, ranging from people who just do not like each other because of personal chemistry, to people struggling in the middle of complex, entrenched organizational dynamics. Now is a good time to pause again and reflect on what you've heard so far. So in your learning journal, answer the following questions. What values or behaviors that are different from yours do you struggle the most with in dealing with others? How will you ensure that your consulting activities really suit your client's nature? That is, suits their values, beliefs, and ways of acting in their organization. Pause the video and give this some thought. Maybe discuss it again with your peers, and then write your answers down in your journal. Let's talk about resistance that can occur from clients. Resistance in a consulting project is when your client or even you reacts against a situation. For example, when a client reacts against recommendations from you or against changes in the organization that seem threatening to him. Resistance is quite common in consulting projects that focus on changing a significant part of the organization. The way your client's organization has been operating in the past is because people felt strongly that their organization should operate that way. Thus, any perceived change can be threatening. The resistance can be direct or indirect. Direct resistance is your client's authentic expression about the perceived threat and why they are not going to cooperate with that change now. But indirect resistance is when your client does not authentically admit their concern and instead does not cooperate. Usually resistance is indirect and therefore can be difficult for you and your client to recognize and address. Resistance isn't bad. Actually, the more successful your consulting is in solving a long-standing problem, the more likely that you'll encounter resistance. The problem is not the resistance, it's how it's handled. If you don't see resistance, then look again. Resistance tells you that your client perceives that something must change or already is changing. If there's no resistance, then it's likely that the project is not addressing the root cause of issues in your client's organization. Peter Block, in his excellent book Flawless Consulting, provides very powerful advice for dealing with resistance. The first step is to recognize it. So some examples of indirect resistance are your client does not return your phone calls, or he continues to question the same piece of advice even after you've repeated your answer several times. He tells you that he will have to think about your advice, then takes a few weeks to think about it and still does not come to a conclusion. Or he continually postpones meetings with you. He suddenly calls you on the phone to say, everything's fine now, you do not need to come back, we'll send you a check, goodbye. If resistance is direct, the project's doing fine because your client is being authentic with you. Indirect resistance is where it's difficult to deal with. And let's look at some examples of how you might deal with this. It's best to be authentic when responding to that. The first guideline is simply to recognize it. Usually your first experience and with resistance is you feel confused, you feel frustrated about your client's behavior. It's important to identify the form of resistance that you are encountering. What is your client doing that you did not expect, or not doing that you did expect? What do you see with your eyes and hear with your ears? Don't just go with your gut feeling. Then name it or report it to your client. Again, be authentic. Describe what you expected and did not get. Do not embellish your description. It should be as respectfully simple and direct as possible within the conventions of your client's culture. Then ask what they want to do about the situation. If you simply direct your client to do something else, your client will resist that too. Your client should take responsibility for what to do next. If his suggestion seems ineffective, then give him another authentic response. But let him respond. Let him respond to your question. Resistance does not always occur for logical reasons. It occurs because of a strong reaction to a perceived threat. So give your client an opportunity to explain that reaction. Most importantly, do not take it personally. Remember that your client is reacting to a perceived threat in a consulting project, not to anything about you. If you take it personally, you're likely to feel defensive, inadequate, or angry, and you can lose your perspective and effectiveness as a consultant. Have any questions or want to share feedback during this series? Simply send us an email to info@consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org. Again, thank you for your time during this video.